be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by. There's a better on the way in the sky, Lord, in the sky.
Alright, well, good evening, fellers. Welcome back to another video. I hope to earn your subscription today. I'm Miles. I'm the host of Kerbal Productions and the Curbcast. Today's video, I will be discussing a somewhat controversial subject, even amongst many fellow right-wing populists, and just Christians in general. This is quite a controversial subject. If you all even look at the thumbnail, you probably already know we were discussing the Confederacy, the Confederate States of America, which I'll do a quick rundown of what that was. The Confederate States of America was a nation-state founded in 1861 when the predominantly southern United States seceded from the Union. I hope to dispel some certain myths about why they seceded, perhaps. But before we continue, I would just like to mention that I am not a historical scholar, not at all. Very little of what I'm saying here is the first time anyone's ever dared to say this, so I will be using sources. You can see those listed in order in the description down below. Conveniently, in most of my videos, this is where a story begins. The story begins in 1492, when Christopher Columbus set sail to find a new trade route to get to Asia, with the hopes of ultimately financing a crusade to Jerusalem. He ended up discovering San Salvador, and by extension the New World, christening lands he discovered and baptizing them in the Christian faith. However, I'm going to be ignoring the Spanish colonialism because that's not really relevant to what we're talking about here. In 1607, which it was quite a bit later, the first Anglo-American colony of Jamestown was founded, making the southern United States older than the North by about 13 years. Jamestown was a primarily tobacco-based Anglican colony, while the colonies of Boston and Plymouth were largely Puritan Christian religious communes based on fish, lumber, and merchant industries. The southern colonies grew large amounts of cash crops, while the northern colonies benefited by shipping across a triangular trade and exporting rum to Europe at hefty profits. And the North did eventually lose their faith in Puritanism and Puritan zeal in general. The South essentially retained the same exact identity they had when they were founded, with a few minor changes. The article The First South, linked in the description, discusses how disputes between the North and South existed even when they were founded. The South did retain distinctives of Southern culture with an agricultural economy, but the North rapidly industrialized. This stuff came to a head in 1861 when Southern states seceded to form the Confederate States of America. What you're often told in education, in academia, in Hollywood and media is that the South seceded for slavery and only slavery. The South seceded just because they really wanted to protect this morally abhorrent institution. Not only that, but poor Southern white men wanted to give their lives so that way black men could be forced to pick cotton. This is exactly what you learn from kindergarten all the way through adulthood. But the war between the states is infinitely more complicated than that. There were a wide variety of causes of the war, and slavery is only one of them. I would argue it's not even the main cause. First, you have to understand that the South seceded in two waves of secession. The 7 states of the lower half seceded first. Indeed, some of these states mentioned slavery as a cause. However, all of these actually mention other factors which were also the cause of secession, which will be on the screen. You will see examples of those mentioning other factors which are not slavery. The point is that slavery is not even the only cause of secession in the first wave, when this is the only time slavery is mentioned in the state ordinance secession documents. So, why did the Upper South secede? Why did the second wave secede? They seceded because of coercion. They did not want to fight against the rest of the southern sister states, and so the only way they had to get out of that was to secede and join them. There was other reasons too, but that was one of the most important ones. No state in the second wave of secession mentioned slavery as even a cause of secession, let alone the cause. An example of a state not mentioning anything for why they were seceding and merely stating that they are seceding is the state of Virginia. The only thing they mention ever in that secession document is the fact they are seceding. An example of a state actually explaining why is Arkansas. The Arkansas secession ordinance barely states that they were seceding because of coercion. This should be pretty clear evidence that the war was also about other factors other than slavery. If they were seceding solely or even mainly on the basis of slavery, then the secession ordinances I've just mentioned would have said something. Yes, there are 4 secession ordinances which mention slavery, and only 3 which even say that they are thoroughly identifying their cause with that institution in very clear terms. But even those secession ordinances clearly state other factors. Regardless, I would like to say that I don't support slavery at all. I do believe slavery is a morally abhorrent institution. It is a good thing that slavery is now over, although it is being brought back in many other forms by neoliberals. It is disgusting that men were slaves for hundreds, even thousands of years. It is a moral and institutional evil. Regardless, it is important to look at things in context. As the economist Thomas Sowell states in his book, Wealth, Poverty, and Politics, slavery has simply historically been as much of a part of the human institution as poverty has. The Confederates themselves were not just perpetually wanting to keep black people enslaved either. If this were the case, then why does the Confederate Constitution have an outlaw on the importation of any new slaves? I will link an article to this down below. The Confederate Constitution very clearly states that you're not allowed to buy any new slaves from Africa. But objection. Confederate Constitution clearly mentions slavery and does not outlaw it at all. Response, the Confederate Constitution, it does mention slavery. Regardless, most of the mentions are actually already in the U.S. Constitution, just using the term slave instead of other person. Finally, there is a document that you've probably never heard of before, and there is a reason for that. That is the address to the slaveholding states. The name suggests it's going to be a massive pro-slavery work, but the address actually barely mentions that. It likens their struggle to that of the 13, I'm stuttering here, their struggle to that of the 13 colonies. It states, very crucially, and so with the southern states towards the northern states is the vital matter of taxation. They are in a minority in Congress. Their representation in Congress is useless to protect them against unjust taxation. And they are taxed by the people of the North for their benefit, exactly as the people of Great Britain taxed our ancestors in the British Parliament for their benefit. For the last 40 years, the taxes laid by Congress of the United States have been laid with a view of subserving the interests of the North. The people of the South have been taxed by duties on imports, not for revenue, but for an object inconsistent with revenue, to promote by prohibitions Northern interest in the productions of their mines and manufactures. Does this sound like slavery alone? While the address does actually mention slavery later, it very clearly doesn't make out slavery to be even a main cause, let alone the sole cause of secession. The truth is that there were many factors which were played into the secession and the war between the states. Slavery certainly was a factor, but that's what it was. It was a factor. It was not the factor. The issue of slavery was actually a very minor factor when you look into the rest of the causes of Southern secession. This is crucial to understand if you're in trying to understand the war between the states beyond a kindergarten understanding. The next issue to address is whether or not the Confederacy was anti-nationalist. It's often to see people on the right be willing to grant me everything I've just said, but say that the South were still traitors. This comes from a misunderstanding of the Confederate view of their secession. The Confederate view was that they had not changed at all, but the North had drifted away from the American Republic that the Founding Fathers built. It's honestly not that hard to find out, but because of the indoctrinations of schools, Hollywood, and media, it's not known to most Americans. The Confederate coat of arms had General Washington on it. The name of the nation itself was the Confederate States of America. Southern justifications for secession make countless references to the father of our country and how they were seeking to preserve their vision. I will show again the address to the slaveholding states. No man can for a moment believe that our ancestors intended to establish over their posterity exactly the same sort of government they had overthrown. The great object of the Constitution of the United States in its internal operation was doubtless to secure the great end of the Revolution, a limited free government. A government limited to those matters only which were general and common to all proportions of the United States. All sectional or local interests were to be left up to the states. By no other arrangement would they obtain a free government, by a constitution to so vast a confederacy. Yet by gradual and steady encroachments on the part of the people of the North and acquiescence on the part of the South, the limitations in the Constitution have been swept away, and the government of the United States has become consolidated with a claim of limitless power in its operations. Clearly, they viewed themselves as upholding the Founders' vision. The North had radically shifted away from what they were during the founding of the 13 colonies and later the founding of the United States itself. The North had become radically progressive, industrialist, and later capitalistic. The South retained more or less the same common American identity when they were founded. It's undeniable that they were far more progressive than the South. And while I don't think being progressive is inherently bad, I think progressing isn't necessarily inherently bad. The North was progressing radically beyond anything which the founders of America envisioned. Therefore, it is clear to say that the Confederacy viewed themselves as the true successor to the American Republic. The last point which is worth bringing up is the clear Christianity of the Confederacy. Even looking at the Confederate Stars and Bars battle flag, you can see the cross of St. Andrew on it. The Confederate Constitution invokes the name of Almighty God 7 times. And I'll show you guys an excerpt, the preamble. The preamble of the Confederate Constitution states, "We, the people of the Confederate States, each state acting in its sovereign and independent character, in order to form a permanent federal government, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, invoking the favor and guidance of Almighty God, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the Confederate States of America." You'll notice this is not in the U.S. Constitution. The Confederacy was clearly a Christian-inspired regime. General Stonewall Jackson, who was one of, perhaps, almost the most important Confederate general behind perhaps General Lee, actively violated state laws against black literacy in order to ensure that enslaved blacks would be able to hear the true gospel and have their souls saved. Confederate President Jefferson Davis and Blessed Pius IX both tried to establish diplomatic relations, and President Jefferson Davis was known to be a proponent of the Papal States. It's often suggested that he and General Lee received last rites from Catholic priests, although I would not be able to confirm this. The thing is that I'm aware the North was also very Christian. As a matter of fact, there was a proposal from Christian senators of Congress during the war between the states in order to enshrine an amendment in the U.S. Constitution which would more or less make Christianity the official state religion. They actually said that the war between the states was a punishment from God because they had refused to invoke the name of God in their Constitution. Lincoln, he vaguely indicated that he would consider the offer, but ultimately he ended up deciding to just reject the amendment. He never signed the amendment. And honestly, that's led to a lot of problems in America, which would not exist today had he signed the amendment. And I know this doesn't even get into Abraham Lincoln suspending habeas corpus without the approval of Congress. I know this doesn't really get into the issue of states' rights. I know this doesn't really get into later northern monopolistic capitalism, and I also know that this doesn't get into the later Union imperialism and even attempts to annex Haiti during Reconstruction. Yet, I still hope my video helped some of you. But I know I haven't been able to cover all of this stuff. I know. That's because the war is a complicated subject. It is not simple. No wars are just simple. It is a complicated issue. And knowing all of this, I'm going to ask you guys all a question. I'm finna ask y'all a question. Do you think that there would have been something happening, maybe even a war between the North and the South, if slavery were just completely abolished in the first year of America existing? With all of these things in mind, it certainly seems like something would have surely come about between the North and the South. They were very separate, had separate visions for the country. It was just very, very tense between them, even without the issue of slavery in mind. Therefore, we should reasonably conclude that there might have been a war without slavery. And in fact, I would say there would be a war without slavery. Thank you all for watching my video. May God bless you all. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Our flag is proudly floating on the land